to The Disruptors, the show where we get the folks focused on building a better future. Today we've got somebody doing that through fiction. K.E. Lanning on the program, or Karen. Karen, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get into your work, but before we do, can you give me just a quick 30,000-foot overview? How does an astrophysicist become a sci-fi author?
I'm actually a geophysicist.
A geophysicist. That's super
Yeah.
embarrassing. I wrote that
That's
totally wrong in my notes. That is, we're not looking up. We're looking down.
Well, I've always been really interested in science and also in art, which I think is really the science and art are two sides of the same coin. And what we find with those types of people a lot of times is that they are such a similar personality type. You know, you have a scientist that goes into a lab, and then you have an artist that maybe goes into a studio or something like that. And so I've always had those two sides to me, and I was very interested in multiple things, you know, besides learning about the sciences, also learning about what makes people tick as well. And so that's really kind of how I came at this. I have a physics degree. And when I was in Texas, I got a physics degree with the geology as a side piece. And so as a geophysicist, my particular area was imaging subsurface of the Earth with seismic data. But really for me, I was interested in pushing a little bit more on the art side, and I actually did a lot of photography, and I had an art gallery as well. So, and I read a lot of science fiction, and a lot of Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein. I really liked Robert Heinlein's work. So, I came at this, and again, the reason I started writing was this sort of idea, which a lot of people are interested in, is, what if we went to, say, Mars or the moon? Is sort of the concept of humans escaping, of migrating. I always thought that was really fascinating. I mean, you think about the whole thing of humans leaving Europe and coming to America. I mean, what a leap that was. And people are just, I mean, they've got that, in their bones is that desire to migrate, that desire to find something new, explore. And so that actually was the core of the books that I wrote for the Melt Trilogy. The book in the middle, The Sting of the Bee, has this migration of when you have had this global warming and the ice caps have melted. You have Antarctica that's de-iced and available for homesteading. And I thought, man, it's really cool. And I've as yet have not heard of anybody using the de-iced Antarctica as a setting. And I thought, man, what a place to have something like this homesteading. And I opened it up with a Oklahoma-style land rush. So, but I was interested in this escape. That's actually was the core piece of that book, and then it sort of expanded into more of the political, social stuff. That what might happen if you had something catastrophic happen, like the melting of the ice caps within one human lifespan.
So you sped up the science. It's interesting as well. You brought up the Antarctica thing because we haven't really had new available land on Earth in a very long time.
Exactly.
And that is something where you don't have a government with a gun to the head already there.
Yes, but one of the things that I was interested in is because Antarctica is all of a sudden this virgin continent, imagine all of these countries trying to take it over,
And corporations.
and the minerals, the riches that would be there that in other parts of the world have been mined. So it would be huge for people trying to take over and really somehow control what's happening down in Antarctica.
So climate change in a generation as opposed to the long term was really the genesis of the book.
Right. I mean, it's basically squeezing that time frame for dramatic effect. And so it's over, like 100 years. And the first book starts sort of not at the total end of the melting, and that's the spider sat beside her, but it's sort of the start of that series. And then the last book is basically one of the characters winds up getting sort of shoved into this presidential position, even though he doesn't really want to be. He's not a politician. But I kind of broke it out into over about a 15-year period of this event toward the end of the melting. So
part of the reason I wanted to have you on is I think sci-fi is super important for giving us a glimpse into the future, making it a little more extreme so that we can react in the present better.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I don't know if that was your thought process for the books, if you were trying to inspire a more climate change based solutions today. What was really what got you to push through for that?
Well, it was a combination. Like I said, the very beginning was this core of people escaping, people exploring. But the real thread, the moral thread that goes through all three books is the human relationship with the earth. Because to me, it's like climate change is only a part of it. There's so many more segments of our relationship with the earth, just simply like pollution. I mean, like these plastics that are all over the place, the air pollution, water pollution, all the stuff that we do as humans to the earth. And one of the things that I was interested in is sort of revealing that, which I know people know, but trying to put it into another idea of what can we do about that. And one of the reasons I was interested in this de-iced Antarctica as a setting is like, here is a new land that we haven't screwed up yet. And what could we do? And this is the main character who winds up being the president. His name is John Barris. He decides that he wants to sort of figure out how he can sort of write a new chapter and use Antarctica as an example of what we could do here. And one of the key things that he does is he creates a cabinet position of an environmental minister, basically, where they are the basically the voice of the earth. So that when they are trying to do stuff, it's like, wait a minute, what about this? Can we just, take this and maybe shift it a little bit? Because we do have to obviously live, even though one of the other items is in that book and in general is our population. There's so many humans that we almost can't help but to be detrimental to the earth.
How many die in your book? So let's kind of get into some of that. So I imagine you looked a lot into the science of this. What's it look like if we were to accelerate climate change so quickly?
Well, there are, like I don't have like a figure of how many, hundred thousands of people.
Make a nerdy sci-fi guess.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, it would be obviously in the hundreds of thousands, but the issue really isn't, are these people going to, drown or something? It's going to be the migrations. And think about the whole thing when you have the Syrian war. You have these migrations going into Europe and that disruption. Can you imagine if all over the world, you had a sea level rise of 200 to 300 feet. You would have entire countries that would be gone. But these people aren't just going to sit there and drown. They're going to run, and they're going to run to the higher ground. They're going to run to the next country over. And so I have in the first book, I show scenes, and one of the things that it's tricky to do, you have a character, a main character, and in the case of the first book, it's a woman named Lowry Walker, and you're showing stuff out of her viewpoint. And how do you do that? Because you got these huge global things that you're trying to show. And so one of the things that I did is she winds up going onto the space station. And one of the reasons I wanted that as a device is so she is seeing the globe as this is revolving around the Earth, and so you can see the global changes and sea level rise, the effects through her eyes as she goes over the Earth. And so one of the things that I did in this is show these scenes on these huge video monitors. Okay, these people are leaving, say, Indonesia, and they're running into going into China, say, for example, or parts of India. They're moving into various other places like China, and they're getting killed. They're getting massacred because you can't have. What are you going to do? In this particular scenario, Beijing would be underwater. I mean, there would be all these things with people moving around. And the one of the things that I was interested in is what would happen when you have all this social chaos. You would have an incredible amount of political manipulation. Because basically your entire chessboard is being thrown out of the window, and you're having all of these things moving around. And you've got 100 years that is shifting, but in the first book, Spider Sat Beside Her, you have the country of America has merged with Canada, and they've formed a new country called Amarada. And one of the things that this corrupt administration is in charge, and so they're now doing what happened in the West, and they're taking the Inuit land now. And so it kind of goes, I was really interested in the sort of political corruption that would be what would occur if you had these global changes that would, again, you're talking about a dramatic squeezing of time. But it's kind of shocking, actually. I follow some of the things that are happening on Antarctica and the warming that's occurring. And a lot of these things, they are happening faster than what they think. I'm not saying that my book is, going to happen or anything. I hope to God not.
I think every sci-fi writer has that when they write a dystopia. Is I hope to God not. But there's so much truth in that hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting how you see these major changes happening. I mean, you created a cabinet position for the voice of the earth, so to speak, and we have Trump essentially fighting tooth and nail to get rid of the EPA. You must be mortified.
Yeah, exactly. It's really terrifying. I mean, the Margaret Atwood, of course, in her Handmaid's Tale, it's almost like it's coming true, with the Trump in charge sort of situation. So it is definitely worrisome.
What do we do? What do we do about that? How do we mobilize support for something that should be seemingly obvious for everyone and yet is against all of our internal best needs or the easy solutions that we want?
Yeah, I think again, one of my things that I'm interested in, and I'm actually currently the book I'm writing now is not science fiction, but it's really delving into this whole thing with political corruption and the fact that there's so much dark money. I think that underlies so many of our issues where somebody wants to get rid of this regulation or that regulation. And when you have corporations too close to the politicians, it just really creates a catalyst for things happening that shouldn't be happening. Because what you really want is what the government is for, is to keep us safe. And that's the mandate. Keep us safe, both externally and internally. And so if they're not following that mandate, there's some reason they're not following it. And I think it's because there's too much money going in from corporations or wherever it's coming in from, which primarily corporations, that are controlling the legislation. And you've got to have some regulation. You want to have reasonable regulation where it's not stifling stuff, but you have to have enough regulation that you're keeping the citizenry safe.
Completely agree. I was listening to a podcast earlier, and they were arguing about unions and regulations. And it was interesting that the guy who had actually been in a union was very much, well, unions are the reason you have work hours and you have a livable wage and you have weekends and all of these benefits. And the people that were arguing against were the ones who were arguing purely based off of theory. And I feel like a lot of times when you get into an argument, you have the libertarian argument that's pretty much just theory based and never been tested. And that's kind of the US leans much more towards that than a lot of the rest of the developed world. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
The proven way that seems to work better is not the way that theory says. And people will still stick with a theory as opposed to going with what seems to be better.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have the unions versus the corporations create a balance of power. And if you don't have a balance of power, then you have issues. Either, you can have the unions can be too powerful and create issues that way, or you can have corruption, of course, within any entity, and you can have corruption, and they have had with unions. But you want a balance of that. And basically, back in the 80s, when they started outsourcing the basically manufacturing, they, in effect, killed a lot of the unions. And it created a problem with balance. And so you had too many people that were getting laid off because they didn't have the safety net that the unions and just having work create.
Oh God! Speaking of a safety net, you're a writer. I guess you have a real job as well besides just being a writer, so you have some type of health insurance.
Yeah, I mean, through my husband, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I consult, but yeah, health insurance is through his work.
Okay, I was gonna say just from that, even if it's the safety net problem is something the U.S. really struggles with in terms of entrepreneurs, writers, self-employed folks, creatives. Yeah. Without that safety net, it's nearly impossible to survive just with the cost of healthcare and rising.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, what technology or trend are you most excited about these days, and why, Karen?
The thing that I keep my eye on is I'm hoping, crossing fingers, that within the next 5 to 10 years, we will have viable nuclear fusion as an energy source. It is something that a lot of countries are working on right now. There's a huge nuclear fusion power plant that's being built in southern France called the ITER project.
Oh yeah, we had that director on.
Yeah, and that one, of course, that's a sort of a world consortium for that particular one. But the U.S. has facilities. China is working on it. Russia, Britain, there's a bunch of them. But what's the most fascinating thing is, and this is always something that when you start seeing private investors putting their money into more of a sort of non-governmental projects, that's interesting, and that's telling you that there have been some huge leaps forward. And nuclear fusion is the opposite of what we have now. It's basically you're taking two hydrogen atoms and you're fusing them, and in that process you're releasing energy, and you create a helium atom from that. Um, and so if we can do that, then we can get totally off fossil fuels and move into something that would be able to give us enough energy for manufacturing, going to Mars, going to the moon, all those things. It would solve a lot of our problems, and it doesn't have the problem with nuclear waste like the fission process does now. And it's basically non-emitting. So that's really, I keep watching it and really fascinated with it. And it sounds like within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to have some of the first real power plants. Not saying that they're going to be functioning, but they're going to be hopefully getting energy out rather than just putting energy into the process.
I'm super hopeful. I'm a little skeptical just based off of some people I've talked to. I feel like people in the industry, you kind of get one of two. Either it's yes, everything's going to work and we'll save the world, or it's, well, if you actually look at it, we're not sure if it's ever going to work. And it's one of those things where if we pull it off, it is so critical to humanity's future. We could also create a black hole that kind of eats us all apart. So that's a whole nother
I
can
don't know
of worms.
about that, but
A whole nother can of worms, depending on the star we create. But technology is always a
what the
double-edged
heck,
sword. Yeah.
all go down together.
Yeah, let's flip a coin. We got climate change anyways, and it's all going to happen in 100 years, and we're screwed and headed to Antarctica, so we might as well.
I have the blueprint to go.
How do you think about unintended consequences? So that's a lot of what sci-fi is about. That's what we're talking about. That's what pretty much everything comes down to is there's a regulation, there's a new technology, there's something, and everything changes.
Yeah, yeah. I think the unintended consequences is huge. And that's one of the things that I tell people, that when I start a story, it's like I put a pebble or a ball on a piece of board and let it go and just see where it goes.
So you're a pantser.
What? Yeah, I don't outline. I don't have all that. What I do is I want to see where it goes. I mean, I have like an overview of kind of where I'm going to a certain extent, but I kind of want it to sort of become alive and see where it goes, because that's the thing about it. When you start saying one thing, oh, this is what I'm going to do, and then you have all of a sudden you realize, no, I'm going to have some Russian mafia group that's going to try to come in and steal the election and take control over Antarctica. That's the kind of thing. It's like that could happen. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. And
Could
then
happen. You just got the location wrong.
Well, talk about all of the above. I mean, but they're, yeah. But one of the things that these different countries would be interested in, again, is all the raw materials that would be available all of a sudden on Antarctica that would be worth an incredible amount of money. So, I mean, I think unintended consequences, some of the things that, the AI and virtual reality Those types of things is we have no idea exactly how that's going to work, how that's going to affect society. And I think that we have to try to humanize as much as we can and kind of have a balance there. Um, One of the issues that in the first book that I wrote, Spider Sat Beside Her, is part of it was these clash of cultures when you have these migrations of different societies because of the global the sea level rise. But the other thing is clash of cultures between humans and technology. And we have to be mindful of that, as we create technologies, that we don't sort of go into a place that we don't really want to go, that's not comfortable for people. And so that was one of the things that
You mean
I was
Pandora? You mean
looking at.
Pandora's box?
Yeah, especially things. One of the scenes I have in that book is issues with people who may be prone to addiction. I mean, virtual reality, that could be huge with these people. And so I create in this one character, and he actually has an entire suit that he puts on, and he literally completely goes into this virtual reality. And one of the things that happens is he creates this virtual woman and falls in love with this virtual woman. And the main character is arguing with him. It's like, wait a minute, this is not real. And he's saying, well, yeah, but she's beautiful, she's wonderful. And it's like, of course she is. And then Lowry, this character, says, well, what are you going to do? Have a baby? And all of a sudden his eyes light up. And can you imagine a virtual baby that you just put away when it starts crying? I mean,
God,
it's
it's
like
like being
crazy.
like being a grandparent. It's perfect.
And it's like, yeah, well, I guess it'll, help the population growth.
Yeah, there are certain technologies like that where it is super terrifying. Virtual reality, especially, just with the number of people you see walking around locked into their phones.
Exactly. Yeah.
When,
Yeah.
or the number of people that are in prisons. There's 3 million in the U.S. If you could be in a prison, or if you could be Kanye West in VR, a lot of people would opt for being Kanye West, I
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. What is the role of sci-fi in dictating public perception and public policy?
I really think that what it can do is similar again back to Margaret Atwood and The Handmaid's Tale, is it puts a magnifying glass on some particular item or some multiple of items. And so it takes it almost into a place where you can see it. It's so hard, because you have this disparate things going on here and there. But if you, it kind of does the 30,000 foot viewpoint of what would happen if you had all these social issues or something going on. And that's what I'm more interested in science fiction, is the social commentary, the human condition. And it really does play a role. So science fiction can play a role, or some people call it, if it's near future
Speculative.
fiction, they call it speculative fiction. And that actually is a good definition, because it sort of tells the reader this is going to be usually a near future fiction, and it's usually has social commentary. So it sort of gives them like a warning, warning.
Yeah, this
This
might
is
this might make you uncomfortable because this is probably going to
exactly
happen.
right, right. It's not sort of like Star Wars or
Yeah.
something, which is more futuristic space type things that it's somewhere else.
Yeah, speculative is much more what I write. By the way, if you guys are interested, mattwardwrites.com, you can grab some free stuff over there. Check it out.
Yeah,
But Yeah, I totally agree. That's the interesting area in my opinion. That's kind of what this podcast is speculating on the future with the world's smartest folks. So we speculated a little on what's good. What about what's bad? Outside of climate change, what has you most worried and why when it comes to technology and trends?
Um, and if I went really near future, I would say misinformation in our social media, and particularly, with the next election coming up. So that is something that we need to somehow get control over. And, I'm not knowing which is the way to go with that. Besides just, the last couple months shutting off all your social media outlets. Um, but besides that and I think that's one of the things that in your writing, the sort of genetic engineering, I think that is something that could be um, both terrifying and helpful in two different ways. I mean, one of the things that on Antarctica that I was doing is, there would have to be genetically engineered plant life more than likely to be able to grow in that environment. You do have, the dark time, even though I've set up a series of satellite-based light sources, reflective sources, to try to get additional light. But so in some ways you could have some genetic engineering that might be helpful in to as we go forward. Particularly in farming, there may be some things that we can do that wouldn't take as much water, for instance, wouldn't need so much fertilizer or whatever. There's certain things that might be helpful, but then there's the whole human element of God knows what's going to happen when they start genetically engineering humans. And of course, they've already started in the scientists in China.
Oh,
It's
I
already.
assume a lot of other places as well.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
just
yeah,
aren't
yeah.
talking on it.
Right, right. They've got them in some room somewhere.
Yeah. But there is just so much promise. Trees that consume more carbon dioxide. You can wipe
Yeah,
out malaria-based mosquitoes. Say goodbye to the coronavirus. It's kind of crazy to consider that I think we're moving into the century of synthetic biology where we will begin to become the masters of life and everything there is to do with it. Now, we may not be good at it, but we will be the ones who will be painting with paintbrushes. And
yeah. I think it's a definite double-edged sword.
mm-hmm, it,
Yeah.
yeah, and with all double-edged swords, you gotta cut something off before you realize you need to slow down a little bit. Measure twice, cut once. I don't think we're going to be headed in that direction, but we can always cross our fingers and hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the information. I don't really know how to handle misinformation going forward with the upcoming elections, going forward just with society in general. Everything's so polarizing.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope we can get out of this particular era sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that makes a lot of people. We'll have to see. There's so many things. So many things are based off of the economy. If the economy's good, then everything's good. So it's tough. We'll see.
Well,
We'll
they
see how it
think it's
goes.
good.
Yeah,
That's
it's all
they've been told it's good.
yeah. We're pouring steroid based rocket fuel on it. It better be freaking good. Hmm. So I want to talk a little bit more before we start to wrap things up about potential political ramifications of climate change, just from the thought processes of what you went through to create the books. What are some of the bigger issues that you thought about and that you included or didn't include that you think not enough people are talking about?
Um, since my sort of gig is this sort of political social, that was what I primarily looked at. Now, of course, my the Melt series, which is the name of the trilogy, the Melt Trilogy, is after the fact, of course, of the melting. So there isn't sort of, let's put the genie back in the bottle scenario. So these people are just coping with it. And as the oceans come up, they lose land. And so it's not only just people moving, that even the countries who have land are losing it. And so and that, not to say that people aren't thinking about that already. But you have to, when you squeeze the time frame, it becomes just more of an issue. And the other things that you would look at when you have climate change are you would have to move or have issues with particular plants. People talk about, okay, where are you going to grow your coffee and all that. I actually think that you would probably move that type of thing. You may not be able to have it in the same place you have it. And again, you would probably have to genetically engineer maybe a new type of coffee plant that would be able to live in a different type of climate. But that's really what I think that one of the things that I was interested in is like, how would you create a world or a continent where you are not using any kind of artificial chemicals, things like that. I mean, that's something that we need to think about. Where do we want to be in 100 years? And I realize that you can't exactly have a planned society, but I think if we could kind of come up with, this is what we want to have. Let's figure out, we don't want pesticides. So what do we do then? And one of the things that, mother of invention, I create, and actually since I've wrote that book, I've heard of people starting to construct these robots that do the weeding. And so you don't have to have pesticides if you have, like a constant robotic tractor or some sort of utensil that will go out and get rid of the weeds. And it completely obliterates the need for having pesticides or weed killers anyway out in your fields. So everything could be organic.
Do you think most people would push or agree for something like that? I think that would be important and valuable, but I feel like there's not actually near enough support for something like that. If anything, a lot of scientists are saying that pesticides and genetically modified food isn't problematic. I think the pesticides are problematic getting into your stomach. That seems pretty straightforward. You don't want to be eating pesticides. But
yeah,
it seems like that's not the way the world is moving so much.
I don't know. I don't think people want pesticides. I think putting that type of chemical
I think they'd prefer not to have it.
into the soil or into the plants. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, little lag. Technology is great until it isn't, right? I think they'd prefer not to have it, but I think
Right.
they wouldn't prefer it that much over having their coffee or having to spend the extra that 25 cents at post melt Starbucks.
Well, hopefully, if you do it to scale, if you figure out how to get these, and robotics, again, is another item of sort of a two sides of an issue there. You could have bad aspects of robotics and good aspects of robotics. But I think, robotics are going to be the way to go. That's going to be what's happening.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that in 100 years, we're going to be just inundated with all types of robotics doing everything. And that's sort of the good news and the bad news, because how is that going to affect society? How is that going to affect employment and things like that?
I want 3 bold, contrarian type either predictions or possibilities from you. Predictions around the future or possibilities of really interesting places to start businesses.
Oh man. Um, I'm hoping that we get a better control over our population and become more sustainable. I mean, I don't know if that's a prediction. I think that you're going to see robotics to really take off. And again, are you going to have riots where people are trying to destroy these robots because they're taking their jobs, like that happened at the start of the Industrial Revolution? You had the Luddites that basically destroyed all of these mechanical looms and things that were being created. So you could potentially have the robot riots, that would be happening. And of course, that would be a bad thing. I do think, as far as one prediction, is that we are going to be going to the moon and mining and all that type of thing. And I don't know if you've read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, but I think that's a fantastic, that's by Robert Heinlein, predictor of what might happen if you had a colony up there, and particularly if they riot against their masters on Earth. Um, and what was the other thing you were saying that, or asking me?
Interesting business cases.
Hmm. Um, One thing that I think is going to be, now that's looking back a little bit, but it's going to be a case study, a major case study, is the whole Boeing debacle of how not to create software and the whole thing where you think software is going to be the savior, and the software wind up killing, hundreds of people. Um, as far as a new business, I think you're going to be talking, something in the robotics is going to be, one of their major new businesses, and of course the synthetic biology. Those are going to be two super growth areas in the world for sure.
So robot riots. Do you think we would literally let people starve if we could just afford to do their jobs with robots?
Um, I don't know if you know the author Lou 16, or 16 Lou. He actually writes. He has his English author name. He wrote a an article, and basically his premise is that the rich people are going to have robots, and then they're going to have sort of these pet humans, and who knows what's going to happen with the rest of them. I really don't know. It could be that we get people migrating to places like the moon, where maybe robots, there'll be a combination, but unfortunately, uh, uh, I think that actually robots are going to be more expensive, and the humans are going to be disposable. So it's not. It is a scary future, actually. It really is. And like I said, we're going to have to figure out a balance to make it not be horrible.
It's been this. This has been This Week in Dystopia. That is what every sci-fi and speculative fiction author kind of gets into. I know
Yeah.
that. When I started this podcast, I wanted to present a better future, a better vision of what the future could be, because Hollywood, sci-fi books, everything was dystopian, and I wanted to be high and mighty, and thought, well, the only way you can create a better future is by envisioning it. But now, since writing a couple of sci-fi books, which hopefully you guys are going to check some of them out, and you'll see it in bestseller lists very soon. But in all seriousness, dystopia and problems are what sell, but it's also what creates the guardrails. You go to the bowling alley, and the little kids get the little guardrails on so that they can have a better job avoiding the little lanes. And I think without sci-fi, without things to scare us shitless, we're going to head into those gutters, so to speak. We'll have more gutter balls. So I think having these miserable conversations about why the future may suck actually may help us make the future better in the process.
I agree. I agree.
Mm-hmm. I want one thing from you before we wrap this up, Karen, and that's if you had to leave people with one thing, a quote, a call to action before you tell them where to find you, what would it be and why?
I think that what we have to do, each individual, is figure out their relationship with the earth. And it may seem, sounding high and mighty or all that, but a lot of times it's just, okay, let's recycle this piece of metal. This piece of metal came out of the earth. It's been, changed into something else, but let's just recycle it. I mean, it's just simple things like that that each individual can do in their own lives. That one person at a time, you can really make a change. And I think that's what we have to do is just think about what we do. Think about where we want to be, like I said, in 10 years and 50 years and 100 years, and make those changes now, step by step by step.
If you set your New Year's resolution to lose 10 pounds, you're going to think twice about those New Year's cookies that you've got sitting on the table. we gotta have some goals. We got to think about where we want to get to, guys, because it is those small little decisions each and every day which change everything.
Exactly.
Karen, thanks for coming. Where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Go to kelanning.com. It's all there.
And of course, guys, links and everything, the show notes, disruptors.fm. If you're interested, check out her work. It really is some interesting stuff. And if you're interested in the 2 post-gene editing society books that I have coming out soon, mattwardwrites.com. You can grab first 5 chapters free over there and get some bonus discounted offers when it all goes live, mattwardwrites.com. Thanks for coming on, Karen.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. And if you can buy land on Antarctica, do it now. Just make sure you've got the cryonics to survive. We'll talk to you guys later. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.